Equality of opportunity is absolutely necessary, but not sufficient in building a genuinely fair and efficient society. Ha-Joon Chang. This is Bending Not Breaking on the Legend of Korra, Book 1, Episode 1. Welcome to Republic City. This is your host, Ben Pruitt, or should I say one of your hosts. More on that in a minute. And this is Bending Not Breaking, back after a long hiatus on putting out podcasts into the podcasting realm on the feed. And, we are planning to bring back episodes to you monthly in this newish format with a bit of a twist from how we used to bring you episodes. So what we're planning to do is reduce the post-recording editing, because that was a big blocker for us and a lot of the reason why we had to put things on hold. And so we just simply want to focus on bringing content back to the podcast feed. And so this has been made possible by continued support on our Patreon at @BNB_pod, which is wild considering our lack of content for the past several months on the actual feed. But we have been doing some behind the scenes work, doing Avatar Legends stuff, doing some fun, exciting things behind the scenes. If you're curious, you can find it there. Anyway, this round of episodes will be hosted by me and my friends who have been supporting the podcast for literal years now. And they have, by all rights and affiliations, earned whatever they want when it comes to the podcast. So they are going to introduce themselves however they choose to do so. And Maggie, you have the pleasure of going first.
Thanks so much, Ben. I'm so excited to be here. If you hear some dog barking, it's probably coming from Artemis, who's, sitting next to me and alerting me at all of the sounds in the apartment and area. But just so excited to be here. And now we're going to go over to our next podcast host, drum roll, Rahul.
Thanks, Maggie. Yeah, hey, I'm Rahul. If you hear a dog, that's weird because I don't have a dog. I'm also really excited to be here. Thanks, Ben. Next up, Kelly.
Hi, I'm Kelly. Not sure when I became qualified to be a podcast host, but happy for the opportunity anyways, because who doesn't like putting that on a resume? But I think all of us have been hosts at one or hosted with Ben at one point or another. So it's fun to be doing this as a group. Ben, what's up next?
Well, you see, the difference between host and guest is a
Oh,
slight nomenclature issue, right? Y'all have all been guests,
true.
guest,
Okay.
guest hosts even, but now you're like co-hosts. So it's just slightly different. And I appreciate Maggie's point that like life is happening, and as we mentioned, like post-recording editing is less. So you're gonna hear. I also have a dog. Shocker. You might even hear, Kelly talk to her cat. That's something that Kelly does
I
frequently.
won't do that. I'll try not to.
And we might mute ourselves, we might not. It doesn't really matter, frankly. But we want you to hear the occasional dog, the occasional siren. We thank you for your understanding. And so, what we're going to do now is transition into kind of the body of what you all remember from our episodes. We're still talking about each episode through a lens. And without exception, today we are talking about the lens of equality, which I think is an apt starting lens for this season. So I want to give everybody just a brief understanding of what I'm thinking about when I talk about equality. And so the first way is I'm going to talk about the definition, right? So the right of different groups of people to have a similar social position and receive the same treatment. And that's the Cambridge definition. There are other definitions that are way different from different sources. So if you look up dictionary.com, it sounds different. You look up Merriam-Webster, it sounds different. And so I wanted to give you one that felt more closer to what we were planning to address in the content of the show. And I think that is what captured it pretty well. Again, the right of different groups of people to have a similar social position and receive the same treatment. And so when we talk about understanding of any sort of lens, there's the denotation, which is how it's defined in according to like common rhetoric. But then there's also the connotation of how people use it in regular conversation and how people discuss it without really talking about how it's written. And so there's a couple points that I think are worth lifting up when it comes to the concept of equality. And I think that there are a few words that equality might have a synonym of or be similar to, but are not quite the same, aka similarity, right? So to say something is similar to something is different than to say something is equal to something. Equal implies exactness, right? So there's an interesting point there of to say people are equal is not to say that they're identical, right? It implies approximation rather than replica. And I think that's an important thing to distinguish because when we say we want equal rights, we're not saying we want identical rights. We're saying we want equality. And I think that often leads us to thinking about like the spirit of the word, which is again the connotation, the way it's used, versus the denotation of the word, like the spirit of the law versus the like what the law says verbatim. And so I think that's an important conversation because like equality and equal are incomplete because they are predicated on something that we need more information. Equality of what kind, right? So it's a multifaceted issue that many things are wrapped up in it. And so I'm going to invite the three of you to kind of just reflect on your thoughts on this lens before we dive into the content. But like when we talk about people, right? Equality pertains to one thing rather than many things. And so reducing it to something that is just one thing is often unhelpful when we're talking about like the spirit of equality as it comes to like women's rights, right? That's a whole lot of things that we're talking about, but often is reduced to let's just treat everyone equally. So I'll pause. Uh, thoughts?
Yeah, I feel like it's equality is more like an ideal like that we strive to, or like a way of perceiving the world that we strive to have, a lens that we strive to have. But in practice, I feel like equality in practice is not just making everything the same because of, you know, everything that is not the same, all the systemic issues that we have, societal imbalances that we have. So I feel like it's not just, you could say, like, yeah, like you said, equality sure means one thing, but in actuality, how does it get put into practice? How do you create it?
Yeah.
And there's also the fact of like not everybody is coming from the same definition of equality, right? Which stems from all of the inequality that we're seeing, right? People of different privileges, especially a higher privilege than someone else, is going, we're equal in the sense of like everyone's breathing air type of thing and you're living.
Yeah.
And yet it's so vastly different, right? Are you breathing air that's polluted from the factory or the plant down the road versus living in a very clean air society where there's not air pollutions, not even considering just like the natural pollutions that we've been seeing recently, but all of those things to say, yeah, like let's talk about equality, but also making sure that everyone knows where the definition of equality is coming from or like
Yeah.
what equality actually means. So I love the definition that Cambridge gave us. Great choice, Ben.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I was thinking pretty much the same thing as Maggie. Um, in reality, when you have a society that is already on unequal grounds, people at different points and in different, tiers of society, are going to have very different definitions of what equality actually looks like in practice.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of the issue here, right? Is again, there's this notion of like when we presume, I love the way you phrased it earlier, Maggie, of like people presume like, oh, we are equal. We're all breathing the same air. You have access to the same grocery stores. You can go buy whatever you want. But that doesn't address the inequality of how of financial distribution, right? Equal access in the sense that things are available does not mean that everything is equally accessible. And so I think that that's something that's important, right? And it begs the question, like, what kind of equality are you talking about, right? And when we're talking about equality, what are we discussing with respect to whom and when and how? So I think all of that is just there's a lot of meat on the bones of this word because it's so used so frequently. And I think that's why it's going to be a juicy conversation when it comes to this episode, because let's talk about how much inequality shows up in this episode. It's a lot. Um, okay. Uh, are we ready to dive into the episode?
Let's go.
Dope. Okay, so we assume that everybody has watched everything and you're fully detailed on exactly what happened. So we're just gonna dive right on in.
Mm, I don't think so.
Well, I don't understand. What are you doing? Like, hold on.
Pretty sure somebody's supposed to recap the episode,
Kelly
maybe in a
volunteers to
short
recap
amount of
the
time.
episode. Yeah.
No, 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 no. Ben, this is your episode.
This is okay. All right.
It's
Uh
your recap.
we are venturing back into the realm of the 30-second recap, and Kelly, being the stickler that she is, insisting on equality, that forces me to do my part. Um, Kelly, will you count me down? And then is
Sure.
someone timing me? Will someone time me? Okay, perfect. We've got 30 seconds on the clock.
Ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
Okay, so our story kicks off with Korra, the Avatar, literally smashing through walls, metaphorically as well. She masters all four elements and, has some patience and, well, 3 out of 4. Anyway, the White Lotus locks her in a compound for her safety, which totally isn't suspiciously authoritarian. She breaks out, hops on a polar bear dog Uber, heads to Republic City, where her first impressions include gang fights, homeless, things. Things are bad. And then Welcome to Republic City, where harmony is the slogan, but power imbalance is the plot twist.
No way. He hit 30 seconds, point 26.
Boom,
Wow.
baby! Okay.
It's like you've done this
Clearly,
before.
yeah,
He's
clearly I missed some
back.
things, but so it goes. I'm sure we'll talk about those things in the bulk of the episode. Okay, so let's dive on in. What are some moments that you all noticed? Where do we want to start when it comes to inequality in the episode?
Ooh, there's so many.
I
Yeah, 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 yeah,
mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think right at the beginning,
We talking like the intro of
when,
the beginning, or are we talking?
well, I guess no, no. I'm talking where Korra is fighting the firebenders in the like training arena.
Okay.
And Katara's like, she's strong, and then the whatever his face says, she lacks restraint. And I don't know, that just was the first thing, like thinking about equality. I was like, man, not misogyny in the Avatar world. That sucks. But
Turns turns out there's misogyny in the Avatar world, and how poignant in an, a show that's focusing on a woman protagonist, right? Um, yeah, I was watching with my partner who has never seen Korra before, and literally the first words that come out of her mouth is, "Why is it always some old man that wants to restrain women?" So, like,
literally,
So
yeah,
good.
um, yeah. I mean, and I guess what does that imply, right? The about this world that we're really diving into more deeply. Um, that you all see, right? What does this like suggest about like this, society that is theoretically in control of training the avatar is written with a background in misogyny? It
yeah, it's
seems.
like even the Avatar can't be immune from the trappings of being a woman. Like that's crazy.
Yeah.
Uh, like I don't know, and I feel like maybe we'll talk about it more later, or we can talk about it now. But it's like not only that, so like how the lens that they're viewing her is not like equal to like if it was somebody else. But then like kind of how they kind of treat her like I don't know, like a second class citizen, almost like I don't know. It's just weird how they treat her. I feel like in general struck me. And when I was a kid, I remember like watching this and I must have just been like, must have been drinking the Kool-Aid because I was like, yeah, she does lack restraint. And now I'm like, why do you say that? Now I'm like, that's messed up.
It's also she's been raised isolated from the rest of the world. And I feel like, I'm sure we're going to get into it as we go on, but putting it in contrast with what we saw from the original show and Aang's growth as the Avatar, where he was forced at an even younger age to master all four elements just by nature of what the core conflict of that show was. We are now at a point where, you know, I know later on one of the things I wanted to talk about was what does equality and the fight for equality look like during peacetime and wartime
Ooh,
within a society? Because I feel like those look like two very different things.
yeah.
But we're seeing Korra, is a peacetime avatar, and we see the kind of control exerted over her as a result of that, given that she's not necessarily externally pushed into her duties at a quote like early age like Aang was.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Like it's interesting to think about the difference between like people compare Korra and Aang all the time, and it's not fair because they're in so unequal circumstances, right? See how I turned back home lens? Like their circumstances are so different. Their rearing is so different and we're looking at them like Cora's what 16, I believe, in this episode. So she's 4 years older than Aang theoretically, and like that's pretty close. It's the difference between Zuko and Aang, right? And the difference in their upbringing is wild, right? Um, and I also think to your point of Korra is being raised in a position of privilege compared to Aang, who was raised in a not in that circumstance, is really apparent in this. And it goes back to Kelly, your point around how like even the Avatar is subject to like the social hierarchy. She's even more subject to it because of the way that she's been raised. So when she gets to Republic City, like she literally comes upon these people who are protesting, saying like, benders are the worst. And she's like, what do you mean? Bending's the best. And like I had such tough takes on Cora, and I was so tough on her when I was watching this because her response of "I'm not oppressing anyone" is like, oh, that's cringe. Like, and there's so many like you are so out of touch with what's going on here. And it's just like the institutional power that we see in this show, in this episode, the voices of the protesters, the power imbalance of it being the avatar who is the voice of the oppressor in this, right? It's just so intense. So anyway, I'm talking too much. That's wild to me. Um, okay, what else or follow-ups on that?
I was gonna say, even the White Lotus, we're watching them literally oppress Korra throughout their interactions with her, right? And just trying to, even though there's that skepticism when they first come in, right? Our opening shot of them being like in um their little, small southern water tribe hut of like what is, we've seen what did they say? We've seen a bunch of other candidates basically of possible people for the avatar. And then her parents are like, no, no, it's her, right? And there's that iconic, she busts literally through the
Yep.
wall. It's like,
Yep.
I'm the Avatar, and you gotta deal with it. And there's that just that beautiful moment too where she starts doing all of her different bending styles, right? So she's putting all of that doubt that they have on her of like, I don't think it's not necessarily your child, right? Maybe it is. And she goes, no, no, look, I'm gonna fire, earth, and water bend, right? The only thing we don't see is air because she's not there yet. And then they're like, oh, I guess it is her, right? But they're already trying to stifle at what is it? Like she's 4 at that point,
Yeah.
5, little baby Cora, and there's still that flash forward, almost 10, 11 years later, and they're still going, she's got so much that she still needs to work on, right? Like she needs to do better, even though she's already doing so much in, like Rahul was saying, a peaceful time. So why are they pushing her so hard when the world is not about to fall apart?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting dichotomy because Korra does have a lot of privilege as the Avatar and obviously as a bender, and but simultaneously she doesn't have freedom of movement. She doesn't have choice in a lot of things in her life. And I just think, like, narrative wise, it's like supremely fitting that Korra is the way she is because, of course, after Aang's disappearance, everyone's like, all right, we got to find the Avatar. We got to lock this shit down. Like, we're not having the same fuck up as we had before that caused, you know, the same issues. So, in that instance, I don't know, whatever universal law creates Korra in this situation. But even though she has a lot, there's some things she just doesn't have.
Well, and that's actually a really interesting point, right? To Korra, because she is the Avatar, is given a certain type of treatment, right? There is inherently unequal treatment of her compared to other folks, right? And I think one of the things that the monks did intentionally with Aang was they intentionally trained him as one of everyone else, right? And the difference here is that from the very beginning, Korra not only knows, but like we wonder why she has an ego. She's, you know, trained in a compound separate from the rest of the world. She is reared to believe that she is the avatar and is the best and is all of these things. And of course, that notion is going to give her an inflated sense of self, right? And, it's interesting because, you know, she's raised in this compound for her protection, limiting her freedom, and she chafes at being locked up, right? Um, so I'm curious about this from a lens of who deserves safety, right? On what terms, and who gets to choose that? Because the White Lotus is dictating this for Korra. Um, and I assume her parents agree to it. I assume that there's a lot of influence that it's like protecting her and agreeing that this is the way things need to be. Even Tenzin, who comes in, is saying like, "You need to stay here for your own good." Right? Republic City's not ready. Um, so I guess I'm curious around that. Like, what's a better option? The air nomad methodology, or this futuristic response to Aang being raised a certain way, and not only that, but a water tribe mentality. So anyway, that's a lot. I'm curious what resonates with all of you in terms of that or a different point.
I feel like I was thinking about that, and I think that this time when I was watching the episode, what stuck out to me, and maybe you guys had a different reading, was it seemed that people were taking maybe something Aang said as a, like, protect the next avatar and basically spinning it way out of proportion of maybe what he intended. Um, and exerting way too much of their control over her. And I think the only person we see kind of push back against it, and I think it makes sense that she would, is Katara, because she grew up with Aang. She saw him developing his skills, and I think that out of everyone, she could probably see, and she's the one that lets Korra go to Republic City. So she understands like it's not in this compound that you're going to develop the skills necessary to be the Avatar. Because if anything, what we see from Korra when we're first introduced to her and when we see her, you know, pass her firebending test is not entirely different. There's not a like there's technical growth,
Yeah.
but she's very much the same person and stagnant in a lot of ways just based on the environment that she was forced to grow up in. You
Mm.
know, she hasn't learned airbending, she hasn't developed this like any spiritual knowledge, like they said. It's pure just raw technical skill.
Yep. Yeah.
There's also thinking of on the lens of equality, if we look at the Southern Water Tribe versus the Northern Water Tribe,
Mm.
just like developmentally, but like not as in like the structure of their city, of their tribe, right? There's so much more technological advancement in the Northern Water Tribe than we see in the Southern Water Tribe, right? The Southern Water Tribe is more rural, there's less population, it's not really a city, right? Versus the Northern Water Tribe, very like big and lots of different people. And but there's also that interesting that because Korra comes from the Southern Water Tribe, right, that they kept her there instead of moving her to the Northern Water Tribe, where there are canonically and historically more waterbending masters, right? Because we know from Atla that Katara was the only Southern Water Tribe waterbender, right? And then, it's not been so long that, they've probably not populated so many more waterbenders to that area, but we know that the Northern Water Tribe has multiple masters, but at the same time, there was that inequality of if you were female, you could only do the healing side of water bending versus the males got to do the fighting and the forms and all of the technological part of it and the technique part of it, right? But then getting to see that Cora is, hopefully studying just as much as her other elements, but getting that foundational water bending elemental, right? Like all of that. And then also just thinking too of how, like what Rahul is saying, that it's Katara, right? And there's that beautiful parallel of her being like, I experienced being the only one
Yeah.
in the Southern Water Tribe. And even though she wasn't the avatar, she was still the only female waterbender. And then now seeing that parallel of Katara, or not Katara, sorry, Korra, and seeing that parallel from Korra and Katara, of now Korra is the only one in the Southern Water Tribe, and she's not being treated in an equal sense of way, right? She's being stifled and there are all of these rules, right, for quote unquote protection, right? Same with Katara. She wasn't supposed to bend outside of her tribe because for that safety, right, of the Fire Nation is looking for her, but now it's the opposite. It's the safety for Korra of we don't want the world to know who the Avatar is yet.
Yeah, the thing that comes up for me in as you talk about that is I think there's a like canonical question. I think one of the things that's talked about in the comics and addressed is how the Southern Water Tribe village that Katara comes from is just that. It's a village, but it's not representative of the entire Southern Water Tribe. The problem, I think, is that it was so disparate and disconnected that it certainly felt that way. And I think over the course of the comics, we see the city grow and develop in this not in quite the same trajectory as Republic City, but Wolf Cove, the capital of the Southern Water Tribe, is quite extensive compared to what it used to be. It's like a full-on city at this point. And it's a lifetime later, right? Katara is, super old, right? The last remaining survivor of the gang, um, that we know of.
That's
Mm.
Toph. Okay, we still
That
have Toph, but
we
spoiler.
know of at this point. I suppose we are talking like spoilers, by the way. We assume that everyone has watched all of Korra. Let's just put it that way. And anyway, I think that you kind of giving this context of this larger history and scope of where Korra sits in the growth and development of the world's context, I think again points to the necessity of understanding that when we say equality, we're talking about history, we're talking about like all of the various things that contribute to what equality means. And so it's just such a big word. But yeah, I love that. What else? Okay. Yeah, if nothing else, I have one thing that's coming to my mind. And it's kind of on this topic, which is, we're talking about Katara passing on this legacy, right? Like Korra is of age, so to speak, at least to Katara. And I think Katara must see some of herself in Korra because, Korra is older than Katara was when she embarked to save the world. And so I think when she says like Aang's time has passed, it's time for you and your generation to take over, right? And that's a big deal, right? Because there's an inherent like message in that as well. One, I want to inspire you, right? I want you to know that you can change the world at your age. But it's also like there's this element that we've talked about of like passing the buck to children in these shows that feels difficult for me. It's like, yes, you are of age to be able to handle yourself, but also I really wish the adults would do something, right? So, like, when it comes to equality or rather inequality, like, it seems like younger generations are forced because they inherit, the inequalities of their predecessors. And I'm curious about that. I'm curious what you all think and make of this moment too. What do you think? Anyone?
One of the thoughts that I had when Qatar was saying, Aang's time has passed, that it like it's twofold, or if not, it's so complex. There's so many layers, but the fact that it's not the same as what the original gang experienced, right? Because it's not where they're going out and literally no adult is guiding them. Katara is sending Korra out to go study with Tenzin, or like that is the thought, right? That she's saying leave the compound to go study with the only living airbender, right? Like once again, there's only one, or airbending master, right? Because we see that, there are three children that he
Yeah.
has, and then, she senses the fourth one is also going to be an airbender. Poor Pema. She's like, I just want a non-bending child and then to not blow air in my face, right? But it's
Snow everywhere.
yes,
Yeah.
snow everywhere. But it's interesting because yes, I absolutely agree with you, Ben. But then there's also that little bit of pushback of it's not the same context
That's
because
such a
she
good point.
right, she's trying to send Cora to another structured slash safe learning environment where she's trying to give, I think what it is more if she's giving Cora the autonomy that Cora has not received thus far, of making that decision of I'm ready to move to this next step, right? Because we've seen the White Lotus be
Yeah.
like it's not, you're not ready yet. It's not time. You need to do better at this, and like you need to still learn more. And Katara goes, our time, right? Because once again, we're watching The White Lotus, and even now, even though it's a different set from previous time, there's still a bunch of really old people, right? Like there's no middle age White Lotus. And that's where there's that little bit of struggle, because while that's great to have the wisdom from the elders, you can't only have old people in authority, right? And that's such a like current times struggle, right? When there's
Yeah.
only old people in authority and you're not willing to listen to the younger generation and how they have great ideas, right? And their thoughts are just as valid, if not so more valid, because of how adaptable they are.
Yeah, that's a much more generous read than I was giving Katara, right? Katara thinks she's sending her to another training compound where she's just going to continue to learn in a different setting. At least that's a generous read versus me being like, I'm thinking she's sending her to Amon on a silver platter. Yeah, that's very different. But yeah, so I appreciate the reframe.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things I was thinking about, hold on, I lost my thought
You got this. I
for
believe
a
in you.
second. Um, but hold on, Maggie, because Ben spoke before. What was the last thing that you were talking about? Because I,
The about how the authorization of it can't just be the older generation, that part, and the younger generation needs to step up and be
right,
more.
right. Thank you so much. So back at the end of Atla, what we saw from the White Lotus, who are characters that we had spent quite a bit of time with and gotten to know, um, was our younger characters were going to them for advice, but the message they got was that we are kind of the architects of our own fate, and we have to decide what to do for ourselves going forward, which is almost the antithesis of what we're seeing from the White Lotus now, holding Korra where she is in stasis. Um, so I they've kind of lost the plot there.
I think also it kind of like creates the question in my mind of like if like if you're trying to make things equal between stratified groups, there needs to be like agency, buy-in, motivation from groups involved in that process of equality to like make it actually like tenable. Like Cora is like not having a lot of agency in like how her like how she's being treated, I guess, and not always having a choice in those things. And it kind of makes me think like as a society, like sure, like we can have goals about making things equal, but if we don't actually like get input from the people that we're trying to put in these systems or that are trying to make modifications, that it could be like a lofty goal that can't be reached. And I think with Cora coming to Republic City, obviously Aang's goal was to create a place where people could live in harmony. Like, and it also makes me think a lot about before this, like the amount of like crazy stuff that probably happened in like pre-police era. I don't know, pre-Republic City era, like with the amount of like probably wild injustices that non-benders went through. Like if there was no system to protect non-benders or like no, I don't know, just like the I can't say that I'm like a big fan of industrialism, but I do think a lot about how if Republic City's goal, right, is to make things equal or to help make things equal, there must have been a lot of more inequality before.
Yeah, I love this because there's from the very beginning when Tenzin's walking us into the walking us into Korra, right? Describes Republic City is a place where benders and non-benders could live and thrive together in peace and harmony. And that is a wild statement given what is going on, right? because, you know, the power difference is evident from Jump Street, right? We have literal protesters on the street saying there's a difference in equality between benders and non-benders. And so, one, it suggests that this is an imperfect experiment. But two, I think part of that has to fall on law enforcement. And this is not the first time this podcast has been critical of law enforcement, but it's one of those things
Won't be the
where,
last.
yeah, it won't be the last. That is true. But like to have a police force that is entirely benders is an imbalance of power. Like hands down, they're like period, right? And the fact that there is a monopoly on this kind of power is wild to me. And maybe the metal benders are special ops and we don't maybe we're being maybe we are being too critical of what we see.
No, I don't think so. I
Yeah,
don't think so.
yeah, fair. But like it just feels like that is inherent to the power dynamic and structure of the city, right? And so ACAB. But anyone else? Anybody else want to talk about I,
That's such a good point. I didn't think about that. That they're all benders. Like,
Yeah.
whose stupid idea was that to make a justice system that's, well, we know whose idea it was, but
Yep.
nonetheless, like
Yep.
they didn't think about that. Like we didn't put that in like the city's like constitute. Like I feel like Aang could have maybe like we could have. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to acknowledge too, with what Ben was saying with the opening introduction, or where Republic City is a place where benders and non-benders can live together in harmony. The phrase benders and non-benders,
Yes.
just describing people who can't bend as non-benders still centers bending as like a fulcrum of identity.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
like saying whites and non-whites.
Yes.
Oh, fuck, that's
I
bad.
don't know what the alternative looks like, you know,
Yeah,
but
you know,
that's
like
something for,
differently abled folks, right?
well, I
Uh,
think differently abled also
yes, it's an
has
issue.
its own
Yeah.
problematic
Yeah.
roots
No,
as well.
yeah, I say that as a somewhat sarcastically and
Sure. Yeah,
facetiously
absolutely.
Mm,
in the same way as we talk about like neurodivergence, in the same way we talk about how people are differently abled physically, mentally, etc. in our own world, right? We are building a world around what is considered normal. And when whatever has the most privilege is considered to be normal, that is the issue, right? And so that is what's happening, right? This city, we are watching it in real time, is being developed around what the perception of normal is. And this is exactly what's happening, right? We are, oh, it's totally fine that, and that's what I love about this show so much more than Avatar does, than Atla does, is that this is just such an apt and real representation of the development of power, the development of separatism, right? And like I think it's beautifully touched on and brutally honest.
And
So,
with the policing system, it's so like it calls back to the Dai Li, right? Like every time I
ooh,
watch the police come in, right, with their even though they're metal bending, right, but the way they use the metal bending as restraints and the way they use the metal bending to use the surrounding areas to their benefit, right? Because it's not that they're just coming in and they're walking or even taking a vehicle. No, they're literally coming in from above on this air system, aircraft, right? And then they use their metal bedding to descend from the aircraft. And then we watch them metal bend from pieces of the building, right? Which is actually still causing destruction to the surroundings so they're able to detain in a like non-safe way, right? Like it's still a violent way of corralling and detaining, and it just gives Dai Li. Like you
Yeah.
can see the, even though we know Toph experienced the Dai Li in, right, spoiler, Toph is the one who created this police system,
Yeah.
but we also see the, because it's more Earth Kingdom based, right? Because we have metal benders, and then the Dai Li were from, they were like the elite from Ba Sing Se, right? The Secret Service of Ba Sing Se. So there was just, there's so much to unpack there, but there's also the, like, the writing style slash the visual connection of that the showrunners did and the creators did, right? To that pullback of, hey, let's think about this system that we had, what, 70 years ago? I forget what the exact time
Yeah.
jump.
I
We
don't
don't
know
know
if
what
we
it,
get a
do we know an
perfect.
exact number? Anyway, it's
Yeah.
been, multiple years. We can see that Katara is aging. She's got white hair, still is beautiful, but there's that jump of even time juxtaposition of it's still authoritarian or authoritarian. Yeah, and harmful, right? They still haven't figured out a way to make it anyway, I rambled off there, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Absolutely. Yeah. So good. I love it. Excellent.
Yeah. I also think it's important. I know we've kind of talked around it, but I think it's important to one of the first people that Korra meets when she arrives in Republic City is a homeless person who is living in a bush. And that's one of the jarring things that she just sort of has to, you know, become aware of this city that's supposed to be this like shining example of equality for everyone. So I think that's important to discuss a little more.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because the person who we see, I think in the transcript they call him Gamu, is this homeless person, is one, it's an assumption, but I think it's a fair assumption to assume that this person is homeless and living in a bush. And uh, it clearly kind of points to, okay, there's inequality here because there are clearly people who have money and have not, right? And that's important in like identifying the distinction here. It's also not apparent whether this person is a bender or not. However, it is implied by virtue of him not bending that probably a non-bender, if you will, pardon my language of centering bending in this framework. But I do think it's interesting that the person we do see that is living in squalor is someone who cannot bend. At least that is the presumption that I am making. But again, I would be protesting too if there was an imbalance of who has access to jobs. Again, if I'm a non-bender, I'm not looking at the police force thinking, oh, I could get that job. I'm looking at the police force saying, oh, look, another job I can't get because I cannot bend. And so, who has access to jobs, right? In a capitalist economy where Cora realizes, like, oh, I'll take one of each, and then realizes, oh, money. I never had to think about money before, right? It like, so much problem happening. Yeah, big, big news.
Yeah, this whole
Yeah.
oh this whole like segment where Cora is like seeing all of this stuff, like, can't buy like no money. She's like, you live in a bush, like doesn't make any sense here. I thought everybody like I thought this was place was amazing. And then like the the crime situation where she's watching, this also it kind of messed up that it seems like the shop owner probably not a bender and then the thugs, the criminals bend yeah. Ooh, so many thoughts about that. But anyways, but so
That's a good
she's
point too.
seeing this like, literal crime happening, right? And decides to intervene. And it just kind of made me think about like, I don't know, just maybe these days, it made me think about these days, like why people don't step in or speak up when they see things. I
Mm.
feel like there's a lot of like, well, I saw it happening, but I didn't want to, I didn't want to get in trouble or I didn't want to, and it just made me think of like, or it's like I didn't think that I would be safe if I stepped in, right? And it's just like how this like how inequality, but also how like the law and how like the justice system like invite people to ignore the humanity in others and like almost like reinforce inequity, inequality.
I feel like,
And
oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, 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 go ahead.
That that kind of like reminds me of what I wanted to like bring up before, which is what the fight for equality looks like if you're in a like I use the terms loosely like peacetime versus like wartime.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a better way to describe it. Is if there's a ongoing like escalation of violence that's being used against the interests of like equality. So like, World War II or like the revolution or something where there is an ongoing conflict that seeks to where one side is seeking to like obtain control over other people and take away their freedoms. And how that differs from when that isn't actively happening. So, comparing Atla and Korra, in Atla, we're seeing the Fire Nation, expanding their control over other nations. Uh, and we see people step and rise up against that, and take action against this occupying force. But in Korra, I feel like there is a shift that happens where now, as you guys have been saying, we see these metal benders that are exerting authority over other people. And I feel like the difference to me in how equality is viewed is when you are fighting against an oppressing force, kind of like what you were saying, Kelly, is like in that instance you are actually being threatened and your freedoms are being threatened at some level, so you have to push against it versus in a scenario where, you know, there's peace and you're striving for a utopia or whatever you want to call it. You at some level are trying to maintain a status quo. And
Yeah.
I feel like that is the clear distinction is, are you trying to make a shift in what is like what direction society is heading is, or are you trying to maintain what we currently have?
Yeah. I really love this position that you've kind of given us around the framework of the story of, us versus them with the Fire Nation, right? The Fire Nation is a visible, clear enemy, right? Where they are clearly making a like the wrong choice. This form of imperialist colonizing is bad, right? And it's obvious in a way that the same thing, like we can look back and be like, yeah, slavery was bad. And I think what Korra does is it provides a more nuanced view of what happens when it's not an oppressing force from without, but an oppressive force from within. And it's this view to me of what our current day and age feels a bit more like, where it's all of a sudden this from within where everything's hunky dory, but because it feels like everybody gets along, it's a lot harder to identify, us versus them. It's a lot harder to work through difficult inequalities when everything like, oh, all the nations are working together and we're all fine here. Why do you have to cause such a ruckus by saying that there's a inequality? We're doing so well, and it's icky, right? It's icky. Like I didn't say that very well, but I think you are catching, or at least following me a little bit.
Yeah. And that's probably what Roku and other Fire Nation
Yes.
citizens were dealing with during the rise of Sozin.
Yes.
It's this authoritarian regime that's rising within that you don't really recognize until it's too late.
Then it turns
Yeah.
into this cyclical, oh, look,
Oh,
history is repeating itself, but because it looked slightly different because of how society has advanced, right? Or,
mm,
Yeah.
things have, it's not the same group of people that are being oppressed this time. So they're like, it's not the same situation. And you're like, just because the adjective in front of, right, the group of people is no longer the same, it's still the descriptor has changed. It is still the same cycle happening again. And just because the location is not the same, right, of where that power is corrupting from within, does in fact not change the fact that it is still about to create this whole domino effect.
Yeah.
And it's also what we see from Kavira in book 4.
Yes, exactly. Spoiler.
Whoa, jumping the gun. Oh
mm.
my
Oh, come on.
God. Okay, anyway, instead of jumping to book four, is there anything else we want to cover from book one, episode one on inequality or equality?
One last thought that I had was about Amon, because we didn't really, I mean, we kind of talked about him, but I feel like today a lot of people are always like, man, why are oppressed minority groups so angry? Like they're all so angry. They're always yelling about everything. They're always like mad and always like out there and just doing, and I always say this, like, can you imagine like holding in your heart and your body so much like hatred from majority groups for that long, and then finally like you kind of just like you have the opportunity, and now yes, we're going to talk about it. So like if you can imagine like trying like dealing with all that hate, like you're going to be angry, like you're going to be like that much oppression, like you, once your voice turns on, like you're not going to be able to just be chill. Oh, we're just, we're just saying, because at that
Yeah.
point there's too much push one way, like the pendulum has swung, and then they're going to push it back. And it kind of makes me think about like why people are like, man, how could an extremist like Amon, like how could like that happen? I mean, that's kind of foreshadowing like the, next episodes, but
Well, I
it's
think
just always,
I think it's important that language that you just used is important, right? Extremist, right? Where the equalist protest is one that we know becomes extreme because of Amon in particular. But when we think about this process in general, it is a very reasonable ask given
yeah,
the circumstances of what, but because we see this through Korra's eyes, the Korra's very privileged background and very like very Korra specific view of the city, we see the framing of this inequality is, oh no, the equalists are the bad guys because Korra is a bender, because Korra is the avatar, and we are, as the audience, positioned to think bending is cool, right? Which it is, don't get me wrong. But like the way this story is being framed as we see it from Korra is who are we supposed to be sympathetic towards? Who is being demonized and how? And to your point, when we see these angry people, anger is seen as bad and therefore, oh, they're out of control. They're too much. No, 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 no. And in reality, they're very reasonable. But
And they
the
have reasons. They have legitimate reasons to be that angry.
yes,
It's not just like they're being
but we don't
being
see it,
dramatic.
right? And so it's just an interesting framework of like, okay, this inequality doesn't matter because they're angry people and we don't like anger, right? Um,
Mhm.
so it's an interesting framework. It's an interesting thought process.
And then they're like, "Oh my gosh, we were sowing all these nasty, mean seeds about and like societal norms. Oh, why did we beget this like nasty, awful thing? Like it's like, it's like filling your garden with like something bad and then being like, why did something bad grow? Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I listened to the commentary for this episode. So it's Mike Bryan and Janet Varney. And it goes to show that this show is made in the mid 2010s because one of the people they name drop a few times is Joss Whedon, who,
Ah.
you know, very different opinion of him now, but in the mid 2010s, he was famous for,
Popular.
being a good writer, you know.
yeah.
But one of the things that they call attention to is a comment he made on The Incredibles. Great movie, but its core message is also one of exceptionalism. It's you at some level are better because you have superpowers.
Yep.
And one of the things that Mike and Brian set out to do with this plot line in season one is say like, well, that's kind of, if you ask different people, just having powers like bending, it's not necessarily a wholly like positive good thing to everyone. And I feel like, kind of like what you were saying with Amon being labeled an extremist, Amon is a bender.
Yep.
And I feel like it is an interesting thing to think about where, on one end you have Incredibles that's teaching this message of exceptionalism, like if you have powers, you should use them, and at some level you are, I don't want to say like a superior being because that feels like very like,
Exceptional.
yeah, but pushing back against that narrative and saying like, well, no.
Not
I
all
think it,
superheroes are bad.
yeah, yeah,
And then we have The Boys, which everyone should watch that show
Yeah.
because they
Uh,
are all bad.
yeah. I am a fan of pirating anything from Amazon and not supporting Amazon with money, but it is a good show. Um, I'm going to pivot us into our next segment. And for those of you who perhaps are listening for the first time, this segment is called Twee and La. And we invite you to, if we had post-production, listen to this lovely transition where we go do 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 do. And oh, now we're in this new segment. And I want to invite you all to wonder what are some of the things that push us away and pull us in. And I think for an important distinction for people kind of like listening is when we're focusing on the lens of whatever it is for the episode, we're really leaning into like generous reads, the plot. We're not really talking about the writers at that point. We're not really talking about like what the creators are intending or the music. And so this is an opportunity for us to be like, oh my God, the transition from this scene to this scene was written like this is a moment for us to kind of push into uh the things that we don't normally talk about in the episode proper. That said, you can talk about anything. But I want to invite people to talk about let's start with push. What are some things in this episode that pushed us away a little bit? Made us feel a little uneasy, maybe.
I think, and I mean, it's the nature of the show. So, you know, take this with a grain of salt. I felt a lot more friction with Korra as a character this time around. Comments like the like you're oppressing yourselves and things like that. But that's the point of the character right now. It's she's starting off in a very specific point and we see tremendous growth from her. So, I'll say it's friction with Kip Core as a character, but I also acknowledge that that is the point.
Yeah, I feel like mine is pretty much same, but the scenes that really make me go, why are you doing this? Are the ones where she's like evading the police for like so long. And like literally, I'm like, what's your plan? You're gonna just think they're gonna leave you alone if you get on Air Temple Island? Like, I'm just like, I don't know. I don't like that part. If you didn't do anything wrong, no, okay, sorry. Because we know that's not his case. So, anyways.
I also think White Lotus controlling behavior feels like one of the things for me that definitely I'm like, why did the cool, super cool White Lotus from Atla evolve into this? And I understand why, like I get it, it makes sense for me, but part of me just feels a little lament at seeing what it could have been in my head versus what it is now.
That's so upsetting, Ben, because that's literally what I was gonna say, and then you took it from me. That's fine.
Okay.
It's
I
fine.
feel like what's probably the most disappointing thing about that, when you think about it, is the old people in the White Lotus and Korra were the young people in Avatar.
Yeah.
Yes, and that's why it's even more disappointing. Just like you said, Rahul, it's ugh, that's so true.
Yeah. Counter to this, like part of the reason I love this show so much is because of all of these things. And as a viewer that is non-critical, these things are like icky to the point, but as someone from a critical space when I'm watching, I'm like, I love how complex this is. I like to your point, Rahul, it's like, yes, it was written and designed to be this way, and that's why it's icky, but also that's why it's so good. And so I am at the same time we name these things, I'm like, damn, that's what makes this so good, is that it's so brutally honest.
Mm, I think my pull, at least when I noticed this time, was like the animation of Korra's face to literally be like a copy paste of Aang's expression. I never noticed it so blatantly in the first episode, but there's a couple times where I was like, Aang face, cute, cute.
I love it. What else pulled us in?
I really enjoyed with the triad. It's a small detail, but and again goes to all of the complex writing and canon things that Brian is setting up for us, but the fact that the three benders are the three things that Katara is able, or sorry, Korra is able to do, right? Water, earth, and fire. And we know that obviously there's only Tenzin as an airbender, but it's really beautiful in the sense of like the artistic visual that we're getting of her being like, these are my strengths. I've got this situation, even though, right, it's like it's that triad of which is so cool with just the name of the triad in itself of there's only one small group of airbenders right now, right? So then the other three benders, instead of creating a unity and an equality like Aang and Zuko were envisioning in the city, went, how do we create this system that is going to work for our group only, right? But then getting to see how that's going to play out in the next couple episodes slash like the whole season. Oh, it's like such a tiny moment, but it's such a good pull for the rest of this whole series.
I love it. Other
Um,
comments?
yeah, this definitely won't be the first time that I acknowledge this, but I appreciate that from the jump, this show it sets itself like in the opposite field as Atla. And it's part of the reason why I have a hard time saying like, oh, I prefer Korra, I prefer Atla more. Because I think that given the the goals set out for like the writing of the characters, they feel very much hand in hand with each other. And I think like, if you go like if you're chronically online like me, like there's a lot of toxic discourse about, you know, Aang versus Korra, but a lot of that misses the point of who these people are as characters. Like Korra would excel in a if she were in Aang's position, and Aang would excel if he was in Korra's position. But the point is that they're not in each other's position.
Yeah.
They're like polar opposites of each other,
Yep.
and they have their own unique challenges. That's the point. And I love that the show's set out to do that.
Ugh, I love it too. Just briefly, also, big fan of Tenzin's facial expressions. Uh, there were so many,
Yes.
like, I chuckled quite a few times just with Tenzin generally. So, big fan.
Also, shout out um in like one of the first scenes of the show, we have like Oscar winner J.K. Simmons talking to Oscar
Right?
winner Eva Marie Saint.
Yep.
Real
Yeah.
good.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. J.K. Simmons is what a phenomenal grab for Tenzin, for sure.
Mm.
Um, anyway, all right. Thank you for indulging me. We're gonna transition into our next segment, which is gonna be a little different than we've seen it in the past. And so I want to invite you all into our new elemental section where we are going to focus on one element per episode, but each time that comes up, it might be a little different. And that's going to be depending upon whose episode it is, so to speak. And so this is my episode. My element is Earth. And with it being an Earth episode, what that means is I wanted to create a question for us, a thought experiment for us around that concept. And so, what I want to do is I want to think of Earth as something that is foundational to everything. It is what everything is built upon, right? And that means that we have been laying the foundation for our understanding of equality through this learning experiment that is this podcast. We've been talking about what it means to think about equality from the lens of Korra and have been asking it what it can teach us. That's the theory, I guess, behind this podcast, right? And with that in mind, we don't want to take this learning and lose it. And so, knowing that we now have this foundation, this earth beneath our feet, what I want to do is saying, now that we have that, what are some action steps we want to take? And so, in the past, we've asked like, what is the intention we want to set? It might be an intention, or it might be a literal action that you want to go do right now. In other words, what's the call of what this episode has asked of us? And it does not necessarily have to relate to Earth in terms of creating a metaphor like we've done in the past, but maybe a different version of this Earth question will. And so, if you're in the audience and you're listening and you're wondering what to do here, feel free to take a moment to pause as you want to set your own action step. What is a thing that you feel called to do based off of the learning that we've experienced in this episode? And I ask that of my friends and my co-hosts here as well. So, uh, does anybody have any action steps that come to mind immediately? And if so, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, I feel especially all of the conversation about equality and how there's not that definition where everyone is coming from the same idea of equality. It makes me want to read and like further my understanding of equality, like reading more books, especially written by people, right? Like thinking of MLK and like Malcolm X, for example, right? Where like the leaders of groups of minorities that said, hey, we're not being treated as equals, and we're not being treated as, you know, what's the thing from the Declaration, right? The uh equality for all, whatever, right? I can't think of that specific one, right? So like that idea of just, I love reading, but just coming for like just putting that in my intention of okay, like over the next couple, weeks and months, just finding a book that's gonna like help open my understanding of equality, or more so of just even understanding others' inequality, right? Because I'm well aware of my own inequalities that I'm experiencing right now,
Hmm.
but then just wanting that awareness of what other people are experiencing.
Yeah, I love that. What else? Anyone else have something coming to mind for an action step they want to take?
I think that, man, I really love Maggie's idea. That's such a good idea. But I think for me, what's coming up is I want to continue like examining like my own what I notice in the world. Sorry, man. What I notice in the world that, maybe I have a perception of, oh, I think it's like I think that's equal, but I kind of want to check my own privilege and kind of start noticing maybe a little bit more in the world and making sure also that when I'm hearing other people, especially I work with kids, so a lot of times we talk about kids, there's kind of some identifiable like archetypes of kids, and especially based on their backgrounds and based on where they come from. A lot of people think like, it's easy to get in the mindset of like, well, why can't everyone just act the same? Or like, why can't, they can do it, why can't they? And I just want to examine my own thoughts around that,
Mm,
and check other people as well, because especially when working with kids, you think like, oh, it's a blank slate, we're at the beginning of their lives, you know, there shouldn't be that many barriers yet, but there really is a lot, and I want to be mindful of that.
I love it. I love it. Rahul, you got anything yet?
Yeah, I feel like mine probably isn't wholly different, but kind of like
That's
speaking
okay.
of intersectionality, I'm a man of color. So in some ways I definitely feel some, uh like oppression from society in some ways, but also as a man, there's some ways that I may be complicit in maintaining a status quo, kind of like how I was discussing before. So I want to be aware of those ways that I am perpetuating that and then take steps to, you know, not do that as much
Yeah.
or upend the.
Yeah, and it's just again this intersectionality of there are some parts of my identity that garner me a lot of privilege and there are some that don't. And how do we mitigate all of the various pulling threads that are happening that are affecting my capacity for equality in a society that is broken? Um, clear clear bias of me coming in here claiming that society is broken, but I digress. I w- the thing that's coming to my mind is perhaps a little bit different in terms of action steps, mostly because I facilitate a bunch of tabletop role-playing games. And one of the things I've been thinking about is as a GM, as someone who is kind of fostering the environment, creating the world, creating the background for these worlds, I want to make sure that the worlds and complexities are nuanced in such a way that that these inequalities can be experienced in game. And I facilitate these for work. I facilitate these for fun, and I really think that there is something I can learn by better and more effectively creating a world in which those things are visible and not visible. And so I guess just kind of learning about my own learning by implementing these things and implementing these questions into these campaigns is something that I want to do to kind of explore this concept a little further. Um, Yeehaw. Um,
Mm.
so that's it. That's our elemental section for this episode. We're gonna bring us into our final segment, our favorite section, if you will, around gratitude. It has been a tradition from the beginning that we have ended these episodes with someone that we're grateful for from the show, from our discussion, or something that maybe someone that we're reminded of from our discussion. And so, thinking about gratitude and characters from this episode, are there people who have characters in mind they want to share gratitude for?
Yeah, I'm gonna take one of the easier ones, but because I brought up the point of what Ben and I were discussing earlier about how there was that slight, you know, we viewed it differently, but Katara, and specifically the way that she gives Korra that autonomy to go, right? Or she gives her that push, right? To be like, she doesn't show up to try to stop her. She says, "Oh, it's just a what does she say? It's a nice night for an escape or something." Or
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
yeah, something like that, right? It's not her trying to be like, "Oh, what do you think you're doing, teenager?" Right? She's like, "Oh, I'm so on board from this." Right? And having that cultivation of our time has passed, and it's not just, at least my generous assumption of it is her trying to send Cora on to the next generation, which is her son, right?
Mhm.
Her children, right? And being like, go study with them and become a better avatar, but also just be more of you. Go
Yeah,
be go be you out there.
I love it. I love it. Big fan of Katara. Shocker.
Yeah.
Um, who else?
I'm gonna say the guide that the equalist protester.
Yeah,
Um, because like I mean, although we find out that Amon kind of like hijacks the equalist movement for his own kind of purposes. I feel like it is kind of scary work being in that position, especially in a world such as this where benders hold so much like physical power.
yeah,
Um, to do that is non-trivial, you know? It's like being in the world of the Incredibles and speaking against people with powers when like these people can like throw you through a brick wall. Like,
yeah.
you
Literally.
know, literally. So, it's thankless work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's big. Big fan. Kelly.
I think I'm gonna go with Aura. I feel like she, despite people being like, you don't have enough restraint. I feel like she has a lot of courage to do what she thinks is right, and it's not always perfect. It's not always exactly like what maybe quote unquote should be done. She sees. I don't know. I just think that at this point it's a little bit iffy because she does make some questionable choices, but I feel like having kind of the courage just to act, or having the courage to, you know, accept that I don't know. I don't know if that's the right word either, but and it's got me thinking about, I guess the really reason why I'm picking her is because I feel like she has a lot of courage and a lot of like chutzpah at this point, which I feel like is admirable, but we see like, or we know that there's going to be like so much change. And I feel like maybe that's got me more excited, is that I feel like she starts from a place of what she perceives as strength, but it's really hollow actually, and it's going to be changing and metamorphosizing in the future.
Yeah, I think that's what I love most about this series is how much Korra changes, right? And we see that change is possible from this privileged mindset, right? That we see who Korra becomes later on, who has experienced hardship and has realized that she was seeing the world from a bias that she didn't quite understand at the time. And so just seeing the beginning of it is just humbling, I think, in a way. So I agree with you. Um, okay, I am grateful for Pema. And I think it was you, Maggie, who brought this up, but the idea of I just want a non-bender for a child demonstrates how uh, unaffected by this power perception she is. As a non-bender herself, she knows full well that non-benders are just as good, holy as benders. And obviously, Tenzin is like, give me the benders. I want more airbenders in the world. I don't want this burden of being the sole airbender to fall on. Like, there's this burden that is attached to this. But from Pema's perspective, she just wants another child and she wants someone that is just as good as a bender. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that that's speaks to her being able to be in a relationship with Tenzin in a way where she's not at all threatened by his ability to bend. And I think that's beautiful.
That is beautiful.
Yeah, Tim is great. Um, Okay, we did it. This has been episode 1 of the Korra reboot as we kind of take this on the live way. Um, and you should hear from us monthly, probably. And that's the goal anyway, and we'll see what happens, but that's where we are right now. If you're super interested in getting some backlogged episodes, there are a lot on our Patreon that you can see us chit-chatting through video. You can listen to a bunch of old content there at BNB_pod. And
Mm,
I recommend it if you're, at all interested. Um,
yes, absolutely.
any other things that people want to talk about before we sign off?
I don't think so. I don't think any of us are social media famous, so nothing to plug here.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, in that case, this has been an episode of Bending, Not Breaking, the live version. And until next time, be well and do good.